Take a look at these images. They all have two things in common. One, they're all from 70s, 80s, and 90s films, and two, they all have a nostalgic, bright look. They look lighter than reality, almost like there's a thin layer of dust on top of them. It's no secret that this is the way many films looked in this era, but it's difficult to find any modern films which even faintly resemble them. So why don't movies look like this anymore? It could be the recent switch from traditional film to digital and the now industry standard practice of recording exclusively with digital cameras, but I think it may have a little more to do with a little movie released back in 1999. It's hard to think of a film more influential than The Matrix. In addition to the many revolutionary things this film accomplished, such as the slick music, inventive action sequences, and earth-shattering sci-fi concept, it was the film's visuals which offered up something audiences had simply never seen before. And I'm not just talking about the movie's revolutionary CGI, I'm talking about its aesthetic. This movie has a very unique look. With its high contrast lighting and bleak color palette, the film can look washed out at times. Pairing that with the many uses of dark grays and blacks, and the film strikes an almost edgy look. It's not like dark color palettes didn't exist before The Matrix. Tim Burton was certainly doing his own thing as far back as 1988, but The Matrix's unique combination of visual concepts was almost unheard of before 1999. And they all but permeated the entirety of cinema to come after. I believe there to be multiple ways to define the visual styles of pre-Matrix and post-Matrix films, and I believe there are a few defining individuals. Steven Spielberg was a major player in determining the visual style of movies in the late 70s through 90s. I believe him to be the proprietor of the flary, dreamlike appeal of pre-Matrix filmmaking. His films have a unique, mystical appearance. This signature style can be seen in many of his films, even as early as 1977. Many scenes from Close Encounters of the Third Kind contain examples of a sleepy glow, particularly near the ending when the alien ship touches down to Earth. Perhaps an even better example of this effect is nearly every scene from E.T. There's a reason why many of his films look like this. Spielberg was big on lens flaring, which is essentially when light scatters around the edges of an object, giving the object a soft, dreamlike glow. This phenomenon is generally the byproduct of shooting on old-school film instead of modern digital. To this day, some filmmakers still shoot exclusively on film. Some, such as Quentin Tarantino, choose to keep the lens flare in their films, whereas some, like Christopher Nolan, favor a more sterile look. Spielberg definitely didn't favor a sterile look. He didn't just keep the lens flaring either. Instead, he took this byproduct of film technology at the time and accentuated it, which led to the ethereal atmosphere inherent to his style. The influence of his visual style can be seen in many popular films in the pre-Matrix era, like Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, and even Pulp Fiction. You could argue that that latter example only seems to employ this technique because it was shot on film, but to me, in scenes like this one, where the light practically radiates from the furniture, Tarantino seems to intentionally capture the lens flare in order to foreshadow the movie's holy themes. Indeed, directors like Quentin Tarantino saw a shift within their visual styles thanks to the post-Matrix movement. Tarantino has directed 9 films from 1999 to 2019. Following his 5th entry, there is a radical shift in the way his films look. In 2009, Tarantino released Inglourious Basterds, a film which is incredibly modern-looking, despite being released only 5 years after Kill Bill. The Kill Bill movies did come in 2003 through 4 after The Matrix, but their visuals were still reminiscent of Spielberg, and later contrasted heavily with the sharper, more natural-looking Inglourious Basterds. One explanation for the discrepancy between the two movies is the genres in which they belong. Kill Bill is a hyper-stylized action film, whereas Inglourious Basterds is a bleak historical drama. It makes sense that one would look bright and colorful, and the other more realistic. But I'm not so sure this is a wholly worthy explanation for the stark contrast between the look of Inglourious Basterds and that of Tarantino's previous films. It's likely that in addition to fitting the film's look with its respective genre, Tarantino was also playing into the visual movement at the time.
But you know what's on my mind right now? It ain't the coffee in my kitchen. It's the dead nigga.
Perhaps the biggest visual influence The Matrix had on media was the previously mentioned concept of dark and high contrast coloring and lighting. The one thing thing nearly every movie immediately following 1999 had in common was this darker look. A notable example of this visual trend is Fight Club. Although it released the same year as The Matrix, and thus David Fincher likely wouldn't have been influenced by it, I think that part of Fight Club's success comes from the fact that audiences were primed to like this darker style, since they had already seen it in The Matrix, which released in March just prior to Fight Club's October release. And as I indicated earlier, it didn't stop with Fight Club. Extremely popular 2000s movies like Mission Impossible 3, The Incredibles, and Twilight all feature either a dark color palette, high contrasting, or both. This is especially clear when you compare these movies to their predecessors. Alfonso Cuarón definitely capitalized on the post-Matrix stylistic trend with his film Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. The first and third Harry Potter movies actually make for a perfect textbook example of this entire pre-post-Matrix phenomenon. While the first movie in the series, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, was technically released after The Matrix, like Kill Bill, it was still subject to the afterimage of the Spielberg era, and thus exemplified a pre-Matrix look. The film generally features bright colors, low contrast lighting, and many instances of lens flare. Compare that to The Prisoner of Azkaban's dark palette, contrasty lighting, and high-definition footage. The Harry Potter movies were always meant to get darker as the series progressed, but The Prisoner of Azkaban is a fairly lighthearted novel, and the series doesn't really get super heavy until Book 5. So I posit that Cuarón, as demonstrated in his Prisoner of Azkaban, was instead very much influenced by the post-Matrix movement. The post-Matrix style isn't just about color grading. The Matrix was visually revolutionary in all sorts of ways. The film marked many breakthroughs in cinematography technology. Many films following 1999, such as Twilight, featured the smooth camera movement introduced in The Matrix. But in 2014, Wes Anderson bucked this trend with The Grand Budapest Hotel, which contains instances of rough, dolly-mounted camera movement. It's clear that not every film which came before and after The Matrix was characterized by the visual movement. Some films, like Seven, which released before The Matrix in 1995, were ahead of their time when it came to color and lighting. What with that movie and Fight Club, it seems that David Fincher may have had almost just as much to do with the post-Matrix look as The Matrix itself. Anyway, The Grand Budapest Hotel wasn't alone in its pushback against this dark trend. Films like It and Knives Out, for example, sought to recreate the dreamlike look of yesteryear. Rian Johnson went as far as to add artificial light spilling in Knives Out.
The gate weave, which are these little jitters you see in every frame, the grain, the halation, another problem with film where light bleeds beyond its borders, creating a halo effect, and a whole entire color grading process with math and algorithms, and someone could probably make an entire video about it.
The movie It, from 2017, took a similar approach. Despite being shot on digital, the filmmakers took great care to make sure the warm coloring and lighting matched the nostalgic feel the film was going for. A piece of media which is very similar to It, but which embodies almost the exact opposite look, is Stranger Things. Released in 2016, Stranger Things was made specifically to call back to that 1980s Spielberg era, which is why it's so strange that it's nearly the complete graphic opposite to that. Stranger Things is smooth, high definition, and in many scenes contains super high contrast lighting. Perhaps this ironic comparison is what the Duffer Brothers were going for, a sort of straight out of the 80s TV show in writing and editing, dressed up in a sleek modern look. But Stranger Things isn't the only post-Matrix piece of media which combines both of these things. Perhaps the greatest example of the synthesis between pre- and post-Matrix visual techniques released all the way back in 2001. I'm of course talking about this little film trilogy called The Lord of the Rings. There's a reason why this set of films is unanimously hailed as a masterpiece. Many reasons, actually. One of which is the way it looks. These movies flawlessly took the bright quality of the pre-Matrix era and combined it with the dreary darkness of the post. The result is a visual feast. The Shire with its bright colors, the Mines of Moria and its bleak atmosphere, the light ethereal-looking kingdom of Gondor, the fiery, dark-looking Mount Doom. Some directors saw the Matrix look as something to fully embrace, while others rejected it in favor of past techniques. But Peter Jackson saw the value in both as an opportunity to display the full spectrum of Middle-earth. I guess it's clear that we owe a lot of the modern cinematic landscape to The Matrix. It's hard to imagine what movies would have looked like if it hadn't existed. And just as films like Into and Across the Spider-Verse continue to revamp the world of Western animation, The Matrix, through a revolutionary combination of high contrast lighting, dark color schemes, and HD graphics, achieved an innovative aesthetic which changed the visual world of filmmaking forever.